At 11:43 Sunday night, the camera inside my mother's memorial picture frame sent a motion alert to my phone. I opened it expecting a cleaner. Instead, I watched my older sister, Brooke Holloway, unlock our mother's office cabinet beside a man I had never seen. Brooke pulled out an acquisition packet, removed a parcel map and several pages. The map on the desk shaded the road's thinner packet. The map on the desk shaded the roadside acreage. Mom had made us promise never to divide. I am Paige Holloway, 44, a community college payroll and benefits manager and equal owner of Holloway Garden Center. I trusted Brooke to run it because she stayed when I built a career elsewhere. Days earlier, she told our employees no land sale existed and mocked me for asking questions. I saved the footage, logged the time, and chose not to confront her. Monday morning, Brooke placed that folder in front of me. She said I had to sign before week's end, or we might miss payroll. Brooke's pen rested beside the signature line, as if the only thing missing from the morning was my hand. The folder looked ordinary until I remembered watching her make it thinner less than 8 hours earlier. I kept my face neutral. I left something in Mom's office, I said, closing the packet without touching the pen. Brooke's eyes stayed on me a second too long. Then she said the office was full of confidential buyer material, and she needed to keep people out until the financing was settled. And she needed to keep people out Enix, Lyfrin, buyer material, not financing paperwork. I walked down the hall anyway, telling myself I only needed one look at the cabinet. Brooke reached the office first and stood in the doorway, a seasonal cashier passing with invoices, slowed when Brooke said almost casually, "Paige only drops in. She does not need to get buried in the day-to-day mess." The insult burned because I had spent years defending exactly that arrangement. Brooke ran the nursery. I trusted her. So I smiled at the cashier, said I had found what I needed, and left. On Brooke's desk, though, the packet was open enough for me to see the signature page. The approval date above my name was from a Thursday I remembered clearly. I had been at the college from dawn through an evening benefits enrollment session. I did not know yet what the page meant, but I knew I had not signed anything in that office that day. I tried once more to solve it the way I had solved almost every disagreement with Brooke since Mom died, privately, over coffee. We met at a diner before the garden center opened. Brooke brought spreadsheets instead of explanations. She pointed to a cash balance that looked frightening even to me. Vendor bills were stacking up, she said. Spring inventory had cost more than expected. Payroll was coming. Then she said, "You chose a stable job, Paige. I stayed and carried this place." Usually that ended the argument. This time I looked at the payroll line and felt something snag. I manage payroll and benefits for a living. The total was high for the number of full-time and seasonal employees I remembered approving. Maybe there was an explanation. Overtime. New hires. A correction I had missed. I asked whether she could give me the supporting report. Brooke closed the folder and said there was no time to educate me on every expense before Friday. I almost told her about the camera. The words stopped in my throat. If I showed my hand away one night and remove whatever remained. I hated myself for thinking that way about my sister. I hated more that I had a reason to. Back home, I opened the camera application and went through the motion history one clip at a time. Most of it was painfully ordinary. A cleaner vacuuming, Brooke carrying printer paper, Jade Holloway, Brooke's daughter and my niece, taking a photograph from the wall for a social media post. For nearly an hour, I wondered whether I had built a conspiracy out of one suspicious folder. Then I found a clip from nearly 3 weeks earlier. The same man in the charcoal coat entered behind Brooke after closing. There was no sound, so I could not pretend I knew what they said. I watched only what I could see. He set a document tube on Mom's desk. Brooke unrolled a survey map. He photographed it with his phone. She pointed toward the far edge of the page, near the roadside acreage. 2 nights later, another clip showed him again, carrying a folder with a blue and gray logo. Brooke had told me the cash crisis became urgent only last week. These visits had started before that. I saved both clips with the original and wrote down the dates. The question changed. I was no longer asking whether Brooke had hidden something Sunday night. I was asking how long she had been preparing to. The more I watched, the less certain ordinary things felt. Every late-night alert I had ignored suddenly seemed important. I reopened harmless clips and studied which drawer Brooke used and what she carried. I knew what that kind of thinking could do. At work, I tell employees not to infer intent from incomplete records. Facts first, source second, conclusion last. I forced myself to follow my own rule. The camera could show Brooke moving papers and the same unknown man returning. It could not tell me why. So I built a timeline instead. Motion alerts, money warnings, requests for my signature. The first visit from the man came well before Brooke's first warning about payroll. That was not proof of fraud. It was proof that her timeline and mine did not match. I saved the timestamps, copied the video files, and put one encrypted copy with my personal records. I did not alter the clips or send them to anyone. I only made sure what I had seen could not vanish with one unplugged frame. Then I checked the signature date using records that had nothing to do with Brooke. My college calendar showed the benefits enrollment session. The payroll certification system showed my login and approval activity from my office throughout the afternoon. A campus parking receipt showed I left after 7 that evening. Those records did not prove who created the page. They proved something simpler. I had not been standing in Mom's office giving an in-person approval when the document said I had. I printed everything and placed it beside my camera timeline. Seeing my name on that page hurt differently from seeing the hidden map. Property could be argued over. Money could be mismanaged. My name was being used to make an action look authorized. I could not yet tell whether Brooke expected me to sign over the lie after the fact, or whether something had already been submitted without me. By late afternoon, I searched the logo from the older footage using only what I could read from the frozen frame. The image was blurred, but the lettering narrowed it to a regional development company. I stopped there. A logo still did not tell me what deal existed. The next morning at the garden center, a courier walked through the retail entrance carrying a flat overnight envelope. I was near the register when the receptionist called Brooke's name. The envelope was marked for closing documents. I saw the same blue and gray company name in the return corner that I had matched from the footage. Before I could step closer, Brooke came out of the hall, took the envelope, and tucked it under her arm. She glanced at me. I looked down at the invoice in my hand, as if I had noticed nothing. A second later, Brooke carried the envelope toward Mom's office. The courier receipt remained on the counter. I did not touch the envelope or follow Brooke. I only read what was left in plain view before the receptionist filed it. Closing documents due before Friday. Sunday night, I had watched my sister remove pages from a packet she later asked me to sign. Now, a real closing deadline was attached to the same company whose before the supposed emergency began. Me. Whatever Brooke was hiding was already moving without me. The courier had barely left before I understood that whatever Brooke was hiding was already moving without me. I left the garden center, drove home, and opened the bookkeeping portal from my kitchen table using the owner credentials I had used for years. The screen refreshed, then returned an access warning. I tried again. This time the system let me in, but stripped away payroll details, vendor histories, and account reports. I could see sales totals and almost nothing else. When I called the office, Brooke said she had reduced my access because I was stirring up confusion during a sensitive transaction. She had already told the staff I was stepping back until everything was settled. I drove to nursery anyway. Employees who normally waved me toward the office suddenly looked to Brooke before answering simple questions. Jade barely met my eyes. I wanted to remind everyone that half the company belonged to me. Instead, I asked for nothing. Public anger would only make Brooke's version of me easier to believe. I went home and used the authority Brooke could not erase from her own system. My name was still on the operating bank account. I downloaded the recent statements and began with the cash shortages Brooke had shown me over breakfast. The first transfer I did not recognize was labeled as an emergency vendor reserve. Then I found another and another. Each left the operating account shortly before Brooke warned me that spring expenses were swallowing our cash. In the internal reports she had shown me, those amounts appeared only as broad reserve entries, not as money moved away from daily operations. I could not yet say the transfers were improper. A reserve could be legitimate, and I refused to turn suspicion into fact simply because I was angry. But the shortages Brooke had used to frighten me were partly created by money, leaving the very account she said was running dry. One reserve description led to an entity name I had never seen in any owner approval. I searched my old email, board folders, and saved tax packets. Nothing. I made a list instead: date, amount, description, source document. The method steadied me because it belonged to the part of my life Brooke had mocked. At the college, when a benefits deduction does not reconcile, I trace the authorization before I blame anyone. Here, the authorizations were exactly what I did not have. I printed the bank statements and laid them beside Brooke's cash reports. The difference between the two sets of records was no longer an emotion. It was a question someone would have to answer. That afternoon, the motion application on my phone vibrated. My hands went cold before I opened it. The picture frame camera showed Mom's office in the washed-out light from the back window. Brooke entered alone, carrying the overnight envelope I had seen at the counter. She shut the door, pulled the shortened packet from the envelope, and placed it on the desk. For several seconds, she sorted pages into two piles. Then she put the thinner set into a fresh courier envelope while leaving the omitted pages beside her handbag. I watched without sound as she checked the signature page, slid the envelope closed, and pressed along I had seen Sunday night. Only now, the paperwork was being prepared to leave the building. On the replay, Brooke before watching it again. I saved the clip. On the replay, Brooke stopped before leaving. She turned toward the bookshelf, toward Mom's picture. She took one step closer, and for a terrible second, she seemed to look straight into the hidden lens. Then she reached past it for a binder, turned away, and left. I stared at the frozen image. Maybe she had noticed something. Maybe she had only been looking at the photograph. The camera could not tell me which. If Brooke knew, the next alert might be the last one I received. If she did not, one careless move from me could expose the only window I still had into the office. I forced myself back to facts. Brooke had prepared a reduced packet for a courier. She had kept separate pages behind. She had looked toward the frame. Everything beyond that was inference. I copied the original file to the protected folder with the earlier footage and wrote down the time. Then I sat in my car outside the garden center for several minutes before walking in. Practicing was a loan that did not reveal what I had just seen. Jade was alone near the marketing desk when I found her. I did not ask what Brooke had told her about me. I asked only whether development renderings had ever come through the marketing inbox. Jade's shoulders stiffened. She said she was not getting involved. I told her I was not asking her to investigate or choose between us. I only needed to know whether she personally had received from the company on the courier envelope. After a long pause, Jade said yes. Weeks earlier, renderings had arrived for a presentation draft. Brooke told her to remove them because they were not final and should not be shown publicly. Jade still believed the transaction was supposed to save the nursery. Brooke had warned her I might kill the deal because I did not understand how serious the finances were. She said one image showed the roadside parcel, separated 100 from the roadside parcel from the greenhouse sump expected. That answer hurt more than I expected. Brooke had not only kept information from me. She had given Jade a reason to fear what I might do if I learned it. I could have shown my niece the camera clips and bank statements. Instead, I thanked her for telling me only what she personally knew. If I turned Jade into a weapon against her mother, I would be using the same kind of control I was trying to resist. I went to Mom's office to retrieve my ownership binder and personal estate copies, then saw that the lock cylinder was appeared. My key would not turn. I tried twice, then saw that the lock cylinder was new. Brooke appeared at the end of the hall before I could knock. She said confidential transaction materials were inside and that I no longer had permission to enter without her. When I told her my personal records were in the cabinet, she disappeared into the office and came back carrying a cardboard box. My framed certificates, old tax folders, and the coffee mug Mom had given me were packed together like the belongings of an employee who had been fired. People were watching. Brooke handed me the box and said my business email had also been restricted until the deal was finished. I wanted to ask whether she had changed the lock before or after. She looked toward Mom's picture. I wanted to tell her I had watched her seal the altered packet. Instead, I held the box against my chest. Silence cost me something real that afternoon. It left Brooke in control of the building, the staff, the email, and the story everyone was hearing. It also kept her from knowing exactly what evidence I possessed. That evening, I opened the bank details behind the reserve entity I had never authorized. The account used the banks did not identify an owner, so I used the bank's secure message system was attached to the transfer instructions available to me as an account holder. The response arrived after dark. The contact number and mailing information matched information I already had for Brooke. I read the message twice. My sister had locked me out of our mother's office, cut me off from the company system, and prepared closing papers behind a door I could no longer open. Now the money Brooke had called an emergency reserve led back to contact information tied to her, and the only camera that had shown me what she was doing was still inside that locked room. The only camera that had shown me what Brooke was doing was still inside that locked room. And by Wednesday morning, I understood that watching her was no longer enough. I needed someone outside our family to tell me whether the numbers meant what I feared. I called Noah Patel, the outside accountant who handled the garden center's monthly reconciliations, and took him the bank statements I had downloaded through my own account access. Noah had known my mother for years, but he was careful from the moment my sister was 10 papers down. He said he would not decide which sister was telling the truth. I asked him for facts only. Did the statements retained by his firm match the cash summaries Brooke had been giving me? Noah compared dates line by line. At one transfer, he stopped and pulled up an internal report from the same week. The money had left the operating account, but the summary he had used did not show it leaving available cash. He checked another, then another. The same problem appeared. Noah finally said the shortage Brooke described could not be explained by normal seasonal spending alone. Several transfers had been omitted from the cash summaries he had been instructed to use. The confirmation should have made me feel stronger. Instead, it made me ashamed. I had spent years telling myself Brooke understood the nursery better because she had earned that authority. Whenever someone complained about delayed purchases or unpredictable budgets, Noah still would not before checking details. Noah still would not call the transfers theft or fraud, and I was grateful. He confirmed only what his files could prove. Money moved, the summaries did not accurately reflect it, and the timing helped create the appearance of a deeper cash emergency. I asked for an independent forensic review. Noah warned that he would have to suspend ordinary accounting work until ownership authority was clarified, because he could not keep taking instructions from one sister while the other disputed them. Payroll was approaching. The review would also cost money I could not casually charge to the company. I authorized it from my personal savings, the money I had set aside for a leaking roof and an aging furnace. If I wanted evidence that could stand without my anger attached to it, I had to pay for it. By noon, Noah gave me copies of reconciliation records his firm already retained and a written note Uga with the engine. I sat in my car, the money, car afterward, with the engine off. I finally had an independent source. It did not prove why Brooke moved the money or what the man in the charcoal coat wanted. It proved something narrower and more damaging. The cash crisis was not simply something that happened to us. Part of it had been created by Choice's Hidden's office. If someone was using my name to support a transaction, there had to be a record outside the garden center of what had been presented as my approval. I started with the company name on the courier envelope and the logo I had frozen from the camera footage. I called the development company, identified myself as a co-owner of Holloway Garden Center, and asked for the title or closing contact on the pending property transaction. The receptionist would not discuss the deal, but she gave me the title company handling the file. I contacted that company and explained that documents connected to a property transaction, even though I had not approved them. I did not accuse Brooke of forging anything. I did not accuse Brooke of forging anything. I said I was an owner, disputed the use of my name, and wanted the records being presented as evidence of my consent. I sent proof of my identity and ownership from records I still possessed outside the locked office. Every step felt slow, because Friday was coming whether anyone believed me or not. The acquisition materials arrived through a secure link late that afternoon. I opened them at my dining table, where I had compared Brooke's reports with the bank statements the night before. This packet was complete. It contained the full parcel map, proposed terms, and attachments missing from the folder Brooke had put in front of me. Then I reached a contact sheet and saw the man from the footage in a company photograph. His name was Alan Reeves, and the file identified him as an acquisition manager for the Regional Development Company. Until then, he had been only the man in the charcoal coat who entered Mom's office after hours. Now I knew why he was there. He was part of the company trying to acquire our property. I reopened the first clip and watched Alan unroll the survey map on Mom's desk. I watched Brooke point toward the roadside acreage. Jade had told me the marketing rendering showed that same parcel separated from the greenhouse complex. Pieces that once seemed unrelated were locking together. I had spent days wondering whether I was becoming paranoid because every ordinary action looked suspicious. Now outside records were confirming what the camera had shown. The unknown man had a role. The packet had a destination. The land had a buyer. The courier deadline was real. Every answer left less room for an innocent explanation. I kept reading. The acquisition map did not show the garden center as one intact property. It separated the high-visibility roadside acreage from the greenhouses and service buildings behind it. An attachment described a proposed consulting arrangement that would pay Brooke separately if the transaction went forward. I read it 3 times to make sure I was not mistaking a routine management fee for something personal. Brooke's name was there. Mine's was not. Another section included an owner consent bearing my name. The signature looked enough like mine to make my who had put it there. Hugh Epate. I knew only what I could verify. I had not signed that consent. I had not authorized anyone to sign it for me. I had not Them aged, the day, my date, my signed records placed me away from the garden center. I preserved the secure download exactly as received and added its source and time to my evidence log. That was when the betrayal stopped feeling like a hidden land deal and became something harder. Brooke had always argued that she carried more of the business. There was truth in that. She knew which growers could rescue a late shipment, which greenhouse heater would stay through a storm, which greenhouse heater made the wrong sound before failing. I had built another career and come in for ownership meetings, payroll approvals, taxes, and the parts that fit my skills. For years, I called that division practical. Now I wondered whether Brooke had experienced it as abandonment. The question did not excuse what I was reading, but it kept me from pretending that hating her would explain everything. I spread the complete acquisition packet beside screenshots from the footage. The pages Brooke removed Sunday night were not random. One was the parcel map, separating the valuable strip from the rest of the property. Another described the consulting arrangement. The shortened packet she asked me to sign had hidden information that would have changed what I understood the transaction to be. For the first time, I could connect the silent movement of Brooke's hands on camera to documents from an independent outside source. I still did not know whether Brooke created the disputed consent herself, whether Alan knew I had never approved it, or whether someone expected to replace it later with my real signature. Those questions stayed open. What I knew was enough. I was looking at one transaction built around a manufactured cash shortage, incomplete disclosures, and authority attributed to me without my permission. One detail kept bothering me. The roadside parcel was not simply the easiest piece to sell. According to the acquisition file, it was the piece carrying the visibility and road access. Yet Brooke had never once suggested openly that we separate it from the nursery. I could understand selling land to save a failing business. I could not understand secretly choosing the portion that gave the rest of the property less flexibility while arranging a separate benefit for herself. The choice felt too precise to be accidental, but I did not yet know what had made that particular strip matter so much to her. The choice in front of me, but our fight. And the developer walked away. Employees who knew nothing about our fight could lose hours or paychecks. If I stayed quiet long enough for Brooke to close, I could lose the land and my ability to challenge what had been done in my name. I thought about calling Jade, then stopped. She had already told me only what she knew firsthand. I thought about sending the packet to the staff, then imagined frightened employees turning incomplete evidence into rumor. I did neither. I prepared a formal written dispute, identifying the consent, my ownership interest, and the documents I contested. I made no accusation I could not prove. I challenged only the authority being claimed in my name. Before sending it, I opened the camera history again. One clip from the week before the first alert had seemed unimportant when I saved it. Alan left Mom's office alone. She did not open another folder. She simply sat beneath the photograph of the three of us at the garden center's 20th anniversary. After a while, she lifted the frame, looked at it, and set it back down. I watched her touch the edge of Mom's picture and felt something in me weaken. I could not say she was grieving. I could not say she was guilty. The camera showed movement, not thought. All I could honestly say was that my sister sat alone at our mother's desk after the acquisition manager left, holding the photograph that hid the lens I was using to investigate her. For a few minutes, I hated the camera as much as I needed it. Mom's picture had once been proof that Brooke and I belonged to the same story. Now I was looking through that memory like a keyhole. I asked whether protecting my rights had turned into spying, whether I had crossed a line because she crossed one first, and whether I was becoming the person Brooke had described to Jade. Suspicious, distant, dangerous to the nursery. Then I looked again at the owner consent with my name on it. Doubt was healthy until it became an excuse not to act. I sent the formal dispute. The title company acknowledged receipt and stated that the file would require review before anyone could rely on the disputed authorization. It was proof that my objection now existed outside the family. For the first time since Sunday night, Brooke did not have exclusive control over what other people believed I had agreed to. I knew that change could vibrated with stay invisible for long. At dusk, my phone vibrated with another motion alert. I opened the live view. Mom's office was empty for several seconds. Then Brooke entered, shut the door, and walked directly to the bookshelf. She stopped in front of the memorial frame. There was no hesitation this time. Brooke lifted the photograph with both hands. The image tilted toward the ceiling, then flipped. For one suspended second, her face filled the screen as she examined the back of the frame. She turned it again and stared directly into the hidden lens. My breath stopped. The picture jerked sideways. The feed froze. A gray connection notice appeared. I tried to reconnect. Nothing. I refreshed the device list. The frame showed offline. There was no room left to tell myself Brooke might not know. She had found the camera, and because I had installed it through my own account. Less than an hour later, a message reached me through the title company's transaction portal. I opened it, expecting a response to my dispute. Instead, I found an updated schedule notice. The closing that had been set for Friday afternoon was being moved forward. Thursday. The camera was dark. Brooke knew the surveillance existed, and the transaction was suddenly coming at me a day sooner. The closing had been moved to Thursday, and before sunrise, Brooke had already changed the battlefield. An email of interfering with a legitimate business transaction accused me of monitoring a private office and improperly monitoring a private office. It also stated that Brooke had removed the concealed device from the memorial frame after finding it. I read the message twice at my kitchen table, separating the legal language from the fear it caused. It did not tell me what Brooke had said to the attorney. It did tell me the camera was no longer my secret. When I drove to the garden center, I saw the consequence before I reached the office. Employees who once asked me about health deductions and holiday schedules looked away. Jade stood near the register with her arms folded. Brooke was speaking to two supervisors at the end of an aisle. I could not hear the beginning, but I heard my name and the words, "Jeopardize the sale." By the time Brooke noticed me, everyone nearby knew I was the reason the closing might fail. Jade came toward me first. My niece looked exhausted. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Grandma built this place for us to keep." I wanted to show her the complete packet, the disputed consent, the bank transfers, every saved frame from the camera. Instead, I remembered that Jade knew only what had passed through her own inbox and what Brooke had told her. Turning her into a jury would not strengthen the facts. I said I had disputed documents submitted in my name and that the title company was reviewing them. Jade said employees were hearing the buyer could walk away because of me. That part might be true. Brooke watched us from across the aisle, and I understood the strength of her position. She did not need to prove I was wrong before Thursday. She only needed everyone to fear what I was doing long enough for the pressure to break me. I left without going near Mom's office. The frame was gone from my control, the lock was changed, and frightened employees had become part of the pressure against me. I called Noah Patel, the outside accountant, who had already confirmed the missing transfers. He had continued the forensic comparison I authorized. When I asked whether anything in the older files explained why the roadside parcel mattered so much, Noah said he had found an archive reference concerning Brooke's compensation. His firm retained payroll work papers from the years before Mom died. I drove to his office. Noah set several years of archived payroll summaries on the conference table. He reminded me that his files could show what Brooke was paid, not what Mom intended or what Brooke believed she deserved. The numbers hurt without interpretation. During the years when Mom's health declined, Brooke's salary barely changed even as her hours and responsibilities expanded. I remembered hospital visits, Mom refusing help, and Brooke saying she had things handled at the nursery. I had been raising my children, building seniority at the college, and telling myself Brooke preferred the business. Noah showed me periods in which Brooke's compensation looked far below what I would have expected for someone carrying general management. The records did not prove anyone cheated her deliberately. They proved I had never asked whether the arrangement was fair. For 3 days, I had been building a clean story in my head. Brooke manipulated the accounts. Brooke hid the land deal. Brooke used my name, so everything on her side was greed. The old payroll records broke that story open. Equal ownership after Mom died had become my proof that the scales were balanced. I had never tested that belief. Noah found the reference in an index to estate papers his firm reviewed after Mom's death. It described a compensation memorandum and pointed to a box number. I still had several estate boxes at home. There was no reason to keep them at the nursery. I drove back and opened them on my living room floor. Near the bottom of the second box, inside a folder labeled for Brooke's compensation, I found a 2-page memorandum. It was unsigned. That mattered. It was not a contract or an amendment to the estate plan. It could not settle the dispute by itself, but the words were Mom's, and I recognized her handwritten corrections in the margins. The memorandum stated that Brooke had been undercompensated during years. It proposed us both management work and much of Mom's care. When cash flow allowed the out or through the estate if necessary. I sat I sat. I sat against the couch and closed my eyes. The amount range was large enough that I understood why equal ownership might never have felt equal to Brooke. She had given years of labor the payroll records did not fully recognize, and Mom had known it. The discovery did not erase the altered packet or the consent I had never signed. It removed the comfort of believing there had never been a legitimate grievance underneath the betrayal. Then I turned the page. Mom separated compensation from ownership. Any payment to Brooke for past work, she wrote, should be handled independently, while ownership of the land should remain equal between us. She warned against using a future property division as a substitute for compensation because it would create a different unfairness. I read that grievance was real. The solution she was trying to impose was one Mom had rejected. I compared the acquisition packet with the compensation range in the memorandum. The projected value assigned to the roadside parcel was not identical, and I refused to pretend it was, but it was close enough to make the hairs on my arms rise. The parcel no longer looked random. It looked like a number, a private correction, a debt Brooke may have decided to collect for herself. I could not know whether Brooke had seen this memorandum or reached Mom discussing it. I had no source for that. What I knew was narrower. Mom's records documented that Brooke had been underpaid, and the same document said the land should not settle that debt. The truth did not make Brooke innocent. It made the past uglier. Mom had recognized an unfairness and left it unresolved. I had benefited from assuming the inheritance settled everything. Brooke had taken a real wound and used it to justify a secret transfer that stripped me of a choice. For several minutes, I wanted to do nothing. If I stopped the closing, I could protect my ownership while refusing to face what I owed my sister morally. If I let it proceed, I would allow Brooke to decide compensation through deception and attach my name to that decision. I photographed the memorandum preserved via my attorney with the payroll records and acquisition documents. I gave it exactly the weight. Evidence unresolved compensation issue. I fee bins of an leasest, not permission for Brooke to take the parcel. The title company called before noon. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Grant, the compliance manager assigned to the disputed file. She asked me to verify my identity, ownership interest, and the authorization I challenged. When Evelyn asked whether I had signed the consent in the acquisition file, I said no. When she asked whether I had authorized anyone else to sign it, I said no. I did not tell her who I thought created it because I did not know. Evelyn said the company could not continue treating the consent as unquestioned authorization while an affected owner personally denied signing it. She requested a written statement and supporting ownership records through the secure portal. I uploaded them immediately. Then I waited while the clock moved toward the scheduled closing. No lens could tell me what Brooke was doing now. No alert could warn me what paper was moving from one desk to another. All I had was the record I had built. Evelyn called again less than an hour later. The transfer was suspended pending review of the disputed authorization. Relief lasted about 30 seconds. The development company sent notice that the buyer ownership problem was not resolved quickly. The anticipated money was no longer something the garden center could count on. Noah reminded me that ordinary accounting work remained restricted while authority was disputed. Payroll was due Friday morning. Brooke had lied about part of the cash crisis, but that did not mean enough usable cash remained to carry us through the week. By stopping the transfer, I had taken the weapon out of Brooke's hand and put the weight of the next day on my own shoulders. On the second call, the employee who spoke sounded frightened. I drove had returned and wanted me there. I drove over with copies of records. I had a right to secure for the accounting review. I left Mom's original memorandum at home. Brooke met me near the greenhouse loading area. Forklifts beeped in the distance, and sorts of flowering baskets waited for the sales floor. Brooke said the buyer had paused everything because of my complaint. I said the title company suspended the transfer because I denied signing the consent. She told me I was destroying the nursery over paperwork I did not understand. I asked one question. Why that parcel? Brooke's face changed, though I could not say what the change meant. She said the roadside acreage was the cleanest asset to separate and the fastest way to create value. I told her I had the complete acquisition file and knew about the consulting arrangement. Brooke said compensation for her continuing work was reasonable. I did not argue about whether she deserved compensation. I told her I had found Mom's memorandum. For the first silence, Brooke said nothing. Her silence was not a confession. I continued with what the document actually said. Mom believed Brooke had been underpaid, but she also wrote that compensation should be separate from land ownership. Brooke said Mom wrote many things she never followed through on. That was true. The memorandum was unsigned. Then Brooke offered me a way out. If I withdrew my dispute and agreed that the roadside parcel would become hers, she said she would end the fight over the rest of the business. The developer could move forward under revised terms. Employees could be protected, and I could keep my ownership in the operating the consent. She did not admit creating transfers. The offer itself told me what mattered to her now, the parcel. For one awful second, saying yes was tempting. Brooke had worked years for less than Mom knew she deserved. I had benefited from distance, stabilities, and the belief that unequal sacrifice. I'm Barchand. Giving her the land could be called justice. It might end the immediate crisis and restore the money everyone expected. But justice chosen in secret by the person who benefits from it is not justice. A debt owed to Brooke did not give her the right to use my name. I told her I would support a documented review of any compensation she could prove she was owed. I would not surrender the parcels to make altered paperwork disappear. Brooke stared at me. Then she said if payroll failed Friday, everyone would know whose decision caused it. The threat landed because she did not have to invent it. I had stopped the closing. The promised funds were frozen. Employees could suffer before any investigation reached a conclusion. I picked up the records I had come to retrieve. Brooks, I crossed the greenhouse. Jade was helping a customer choose between trays of seedlings. She glanced at me, then looked away. If I could not keep the truth would matter. I could feel how little the truth would matter if I could not keep those people paid long enough for it to surface. By Thursday evening, the property transfer was suspended. Brooke could no longer push it through with the disputed consent, and the private bargain she offered me was dead. For the first time, she did not control the land transaction. But Friday payroll was only hours away, and stopping my sister had just made saving everyone else my responsibility. Friday payroll was only hours away, and stopping my sister had made saving everyone else my responsibility. Before dawn, I sat at my kitchen table, with my personal savings account open beside the garden center's operating balance. The money I had set aside for my roof and furnace looked painfully small against a payroll that could not be delayed without hurting people who had nothing to do with Brooke and me. I called Noah Patel, the outside accountant, who had already confirmed the hidden transfers, and asked what we could do without giving either sister private control of the cash. Noah said his firm could document an emergency owner contribution and route ordinary expenses through a segregated process. While the ownership dispute remained unresolved, I authorized enough from my savings to cover the immediate gap. Years of careful saving disappeared with one transfer, but by mid-morning Noah confirmed that payroll could proceed. I had bought time, not victory. At the garden center, nobody applauded. A supervisor asked whether health deductions would still process. A cashier wanted to know if her direct deposit was safe. I answered only what Noah had confirmed. For days, I had been fighting the version of the story Brooke controlled. That morning, I understood that employees did not need a public trial between two sisters. They needed paychecks and reliable information. When one employee thanked me, I said only had instructed me to preserve everything through the accounting process. My attorney had instructed me to preserve the exactly. I sent the unedited camera files, motion history, bank statements, complete acquisition packet, Noah's reconciliation note, and my timeline through the secure channels he provided. I did not create a highlight reel or send clips to employees. The title company already had my formal dispute. Noah's firm had the financial records, and my attorney could decide where the evidence belonged next. Part of me wanted everyone to watch Brooke remove pages from the packet. But the camera had taught me something I had not expected. An image could prove an action and still leave motive unanswered. If I used a silent clip to tell people what Brooke felt or intended, I would be claiming more than I knew. By lunch, I heard two employees whispering that the developer had walked because I sabotaged the deal. I knew only that the buyer had reserved the right to withdraw. So I corrected nothing I could not prove. Then my attorney called. He warned that a full review would not examine Brooke alone. My years of limited involvement, the garden center's loose approval practices, and the way both sisters had allowed operational authority to become informal could all be scrutinized. I felt the old urge to retreat. I had benefited from a system Zigli's I should have watched more closely. If the process exposed my negligence alongside her deception, I would have to live with it, I told him to continue. That choice cost me the last easy version of myself. Brooke had crossed boundaries I had not crossed, but I had helped create a business where one sister could control information while the other called that arrangement trust. Accountability that stopped at Brooke would have been convenient, not honest. Jade found me near the greenhouse office that afternoon. My niece said she wanted to understand one thing: whether Brooke had known about the parcel separation before telling everyone there was no land deal. I told Jade I would not show her private bank records, the disputed consent, or camera footage she had no role in. I could show her only the development rendering that had passed through the marketing inbox she managed. I opened the copy from the acquisition file. The bold boundary line divided the roadside acreage from the greenhouse complex exactly as Jade had described. She stared at it, then said it looked like the rendering Brooke had ordered removed from the presentation weeks earlier. Jade remembered Brooke saying there was no real property proposal, only a preliminary concept that would never leave the draft stage. The closing documents showed that the proposal had gone far beyond that. I felt the temptation to ask Jade to tell the staff. I did not. I told her she did not owe me a public statement and did not need to choose between her mother and me. If anyone asked what she knew, she should say only what she personally remembered. Jade closed the laptop and said she was done, repeating claims she could not verify. It was not an alliance. It was something better, her own boundary. Later, Noah called with preliminary results from the historical compensation review. He had compared the duties documented in older records and the years when she carried more management work during Mom's illness. Mom's unsigned memorandum could not become a binding promise, but Noah said there was a range for undercompensation to calculate a supported range for undercompensation. Brooke had lied to me, hidden transaction terms, and tried to use my name. She had also worked years for less than the records suggested her role was worth. Both things could be true without canceling each other. Through counsel, I agreed that any historical compensation Brooke could support with records should be evaluated separately from the disputed land transaction. I refused to trade the old debt did not exist, and I refused to pretend the old debt did not exist. The hidden transfers and proposed consulting benefit would remain part of the financial and civil review. The compensation question would stand on its own evidence. For the first time since the camera alert, the conflict was no longer a choice between surrendering to Brooke and destroying her. I could acknowledge what she had been owed without accepting what she tried to take. The following week, both owners received written notice that the developer was withdrawing while the ownership dispute remained unresolved. The transaction was dead. There would be no sudden rescue money, no private consulting arrangement attached to it, and no transfer of the roadside parcel under the disputed consent. The news frightened me because the garden center now had to survive on its actual business. It also ended the deadline Brooke had used to force my signature. The financial review continued. Some reserve transfers were returned or credited through the accounting process, while others required documentation before they could be classified. I did not call all of them stolen because the records did not support that conclusion. New controls required dual documentation for major transfers, independent monthly reconciliation, and written owner approval for property matters. They were boring safeguards. I came to love them for exactly that reason. Brooke and I met through counsel to resolve management authority. There was no dramatic confession. She disputed parts of my interpretation and defended years of decisions as necessary to keep the nursery alive. I did not know everything she believed, and I stopped trying to force certainty where I did not have it. What I had were records. Under the resulting formal arrangement, Brooke left day-to-day management, took over operations, while ownership decisions required documented approval instead of assumptions and old habits. Any validated historical settlement process, rather than through ESBAs, would be handled through the settlement process rather than through secret control of the land. Accepting that arrangement meant giving up the fantasy that Brooke and I could return to the way things were before Sunday night. I remained an owner, but I changed my own role. I began attending scheduled financial reviews, reading monthly reconciliations, and asking questions before crises. I did not move into Brooke's old office. I did not want her chair. The lesson was not that I should control everything. It was that trust without visibility had allowed both of us to avoid difficult truths until the cost became enormous. Months later, the garden center survived into another spring cycle. The roof at my house still needed work because the savings I had used for payroll had not magically returned. Jade and I spoke carefully at first, then more naturally. Brooke and I communicated mostly through practical channels. I could not predict what our relationship would become, and I did not call the crisis healed simply because the transaction was over. One morning, I carried Mom's memorial frame back into the garden center. The hidden camera had been removed and preserved with the case records. I had no reason to put another lens inside it. The photograph showed Mom between Brooke and me at the nursery's 20th anniversary, all three of us smiling at something outside the frame. For years, I thought that picture meant loyalty was proven by never questioning family. Then I used it to watch my sister because I no longer trusted her at all. Neither meaning was enough. I hung the frame where it faced the greenhouse instead of the locked document cabinet. Beyond the glass, rows of new seedlings filled the benches, small and ordinary and alive. There was no camera behind Mom's photograph anymore. No blinking light, no motion alert waiting to tell me what someone was doing when I was gone. The frame was only a frame again, and for the first time, I understood that protecting what my mother felt did not mean preserving every secret that grew inside it.